intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford. Of course, he is the president and CEO and general counsel, of course, for First Liberty, and Lathan Watts, who's the director of public affairs for First Liberty. And, of course, we're going to be talking about a couple of these Supreme Court decisions, of which there are many. I just posted one article from The Hill about the trio of rulings, but since then, of course, we have some others to talk about as well, whether or not Donald Trump should have his tax returns put in the hands of the New York District Attorney and a couple of others, as well as even when we're talking about how does this affect Oklahoma's Indian reservations and the rest. And as we mentioned yesterday, a situation with the Navy, which is all good. And Kelly, you just got to be flying, because this has been an incredibly 2 good weeks for religious liberty.
Yeah, and we could have been talking about right now. What just happened? The term just ended, right?
Yeah.
What happens when the term ends sometimes? A justice announces they're stepping down. So there were all kinds of rumors flying.
Yeah.
We haven't heard anything, which I think means nobody is stepping down, which is good news to some people because they're scared that some of the good people would step down. So that's the other big news is nobody has, at least at this point, nobody has announced. But these decisions over the past month have been just head turning. Mm-hmm. I mean, as you said, not that we're going to talk about this, I hadn't even looked at these opinions, but half of Oklahoma just got taken over by an Indian reservation.
What does that mean?
People are listening to this, they go, "Oh, he's being hyperbolic." No, literally half of Oklahoma is now an Indian reservation. So
I don't understand any
There's
of
some
these.
crazy stuff in addition to what we would normally talk about, which we will, which is religious freedom. There's been some really big decisions there. Of course, the decision earlier, Bostock, which is about transgenderism and all this, but it's going to have a huge impact on religious liberty. So there's just a ton of things that have happened in the past 3 to 4 weeks, including a refocusing on the issue of judges, which brings us to the election in less than 4 months.
Yes.
So it's been a hectic time.
I want to talk to Lathan because he's been involved in a lot of political campaigns. Before we get to these cases, let's talk about this, because there were some a couple of weeks ago saying, the problem with the Trump campaign is they're using the 2016 message in a 2020 election, because the 2016 was all about judges, the Supreme Court, you had a vacancy and all that. And everybody's going, well, that is trying to win an election with an outmoded theme. I wouldn't think that would be the case now, because with these decisions, some going in the right direction, which we'll talk about. Kelly talked about one going in the other direction. I think the Supreme Court looks ever more important than it did even in 2016, if that's possible.
It does. And the thing that happened in between there, this little thing about COVID-19 pandemic and the closing of the American economy, I think the Trump campaign has looked at, okay, here's where we are, here's what happened. They looked at what worked in 2016, and it appears they have found a way to just simply update the message from 2016 and run on it again, which, it worked. So, we'll see if it works again. But basically, if you take a look at what they're doing, they're basically saying, look, we said we needed to make America great again, right? And we put some things in place, and we had the greatest economic expansion, in decades. Mm-hmm. Then we completely closed our economy. So now we have to do it again.
Yeah.
And so they're actually back to, make America great again. And he is saying, you listen to him in interviews and speeches or whatever. He's saying, look, we did it once. Then we had this happen. So now we have to do it again.
Yeah.
And we know that we can because we've shown that we did.
Right.
Everybody has experienced that. And then you have some of these other elements that were present in 2016, come back in the form of all the stuff about religious liberty and the court cases going on. And like Kelly said, there's always speculation around the end of a term if somebody's going to retire. So it is, there's definitely differences between this cycle and last cycle, but some of the big themes are there for him to run on again. And it looks like his team has figured that out, and they're capitalizing on it.
The one big thing that's different, and again, I know we'll probably talk about this. We're in the time when a lot of Texas stations are on right now. We'll probably talk about the Texas stuff going on, which is crazy.
We certainly will.
The governor is probably glad he's not running for office right now. There's a lot of people that would like to, have their mask ripped off because they don't like the mask orders and all this. And there's the state convention, which the Republican convention, which a Democrat mayor just canceled. And, so you got all and lawsuits on that and going to the Texas Supreme Court this weekend. And all that. But the thing that has changed, and I've heard this from a number of people, different people that are polling in different ways, it's totally opposite as what the top three issues are for people. Right now, the number one issue, I kid you not, is the fake media.
Mm-hmm.
People have seen, they can't trust the information anymore. They see the bias, and that's the number one issue. That's never been the number two issue is the Second Amendment and safety.
Yes.
But physical safety because of the mobs and all this stuff they're seeing. And number three is religious freedom.
Yeah.
So we've never had those be the top three issues. So that tells you something. It's unique. I haven't seen any articles written on this, but one of Trump's problems has been suburban women.
Right. Very true.
Well, suburban women are at the top of the list of people who want safety restored. And so it's going to be interesting if normally his way, Trump's way, which kind of puts off women,
yeah,
if that's going to be overcome by the fact that he at least will provide safety and law and order and protection for their children and their families, it's going to be fascinating to see how this works out.
We'll talk about this later, but one of the things that they've said that is not working in the Trump campaign is his attack on defunding the police. And they figured out why. If you look at the latest Monmouth University poll, 77% of respondents believe most activists using the phrase defund the police just want to change the way police operate. And only 18% really believe that defund the police means defund the police. Now, take that to our friends in Seattle. There's the Seattle City Council, which decided to defund the police by 50%.
Yeah.
And we've already, in New York, reduced that budget by $1 billion. And maybe over time that one will work. But nevertheless, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some of these cases because we'll talk about that. Also got some very disturbing news, which we talked about before. Texas has been conflating all of these tests, the antibody test with the viral test, and that is not just a small number. That is a situation of 49,000 antibody tests. So that has some implications to it. The question about whether we're going to reopen the schools and whether or not the Texas Republican Convention will be indoors, outdoors, or not at all, virtual,
That's right.
Who knows? So we have all sorts of things to talk about here today. And certainly, as we work our way through that, let me give you kind of a preview. The next couple hours, we'll look at what about this cancel culture and how that's played out. The speech by the president last week, which I've never really had a chance to get some of our comments about, and even contrast that to Joe Biden's speech on the 4th of July. So I'll give you some of that. And then Jacki Deason will be with us at 2 o'clock. So we have lots to cover and lots of people to talk about. So we'll be doing that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
For decades, most people knew Bono as a musician with the group U2 and a social activist. But today, many of his fans would be surprised to hear him promote some of the benefits of capitalism. At a World Economic Forum, he made this observation. Capitalism is not immoral, it's amoral. It requires our instruction. Capitalism has taken more people out of poverty than any other ism. But it is a wild beast, and if not tamed, can chew up a lot of people along the way. As you can see, he isn't a complete supporter of the free market, but he is willing to give some appreciation for what capitalism has done to reduce extreme poverty. Hugh Welchel, who is the executive director of the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, begins his essay with this quote from Bono. He then goes on to document something I've talked about with a number of economists and theologians on the Point of View radio talk show. Capitalism has been able to raise more than 1 billion people around the world out of extreme poverty. On one of my radio programs, I quoted a Barna survey of Americans. 3/4 of those surveyed believed that world poverty had increased. Only 7% thought it decreased. Scott Todd, in his book Hope Rising, reminds us that in 1981, a majority of the developing world's population lived in extreme poverty. That percentage has been cut by more than half. Hugh Welchel reminds us that in a recent Gallup poll, it shows that a majority of young people favor socialism over capitalism. The increased visibilities of members of Congress who openly describe themselves as socialists suggest that the percentage of young people embracing socialism might increase. These young people need to pay attention to Bono and the World Economic Statistics that demonstrate the power of a free market to relieve poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition, and we might talk about a few of these Supreme Court cases because let me just take one simple one, and that is the Little Sisters of the Poor for two reasons. Number one, a lot of people just want to say, Lathan, I thought we solved this one. And, of course, that's still ongoing. And number two, I cannot imagine why the former vice president, the presumptive presidential nominee, Joe Biden, says, well, we're going to fix that when I get in, because just think of the optics for a minute. You have this particular organization, which I loved how Clarence Thomas talked about their history and their sacrifice, and the fact that they're nuns just did not want to have money spent on abortifacients and contraception, that if you're going to pick on a group, that's probably the least likely group you'd want to pick on. But nevertheless, Joe Biden felt the need to actually say something about this. So give us the history and what's going on here.
Yeah, exactly. Joe Biden, who I will take him at his word, as a devout Catholic, is vowing, if he is elected president, to reverse this decision and force nuns, Catholic nuns, to pay for contraception. Just take it from a...
That's just hard to even get your head around, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before you even get to any of the religious liberty connotations of it,
yeah.
Do nuns need contraception?
Not thinking.
Let's just talk about it from a policy perspective. Yeah. How much taxpayer money are you willing to spend litigating this issue to force people who clearly don't need contraception to have some sort of health insurance plan that covers it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a bad policy decision. You mentioned, the optics. If your preferred policy has you suing the Little Sisters of the Poor, it's probably time to rethink the policy.
I would think so.
Three, for Biden himself personally, being a devout Catholic, it puts him in a very odd position, and that's self-inflicted. He came out and said it.
Yeah.
And then let's get to the religious liberty connotations of it, how it impacts the rest of us. So it's a 7-2 decision, and like we were saying in the break, with the court made up of the members that it is right now, if it's 7-2, and you've got the 5, supposed conservatives and 2 of the liberals on the same opinion, it is probably not as good as you think it is. And
I would say so.
So there were multiple questions in this case before the court, and they really only answered one of them.
Yeah.
And that's how you get to that 7-2.
Right.
Because if you go to the next question, so let's say the first question is, does this statute, the Obamacare law, does it give authority to executive branch agencies who are administering this law to grant exceptions to it or exemptions to it?
Sure.
And that's the question they ruled on, and they said yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the reason you can get Kagan and Breyer to go along with that is because, let's say Joe Biden is elected and he fulfills the promise he just made. If by this decision you have just clearly stated that the executive branch agencies can grant exemptions, then the executive branch agencies can withdraw
them
exemptions or
you
narrow
got that.
them.
You got that.
That's how you get Kagan and Breyer on that opinion, and that's how you get to 7-2. And I think Roberts, who is typically looking for consensus when he can get one, and I think you can take a look at how the court has acted under him as Chief Justice, his tendency to take the smallest step available to him,
Right.
That's how you get that decision.
Yeah.
So the Little Sisters, who have been litigating this with our friends at Beckett, I think for a decade now, they're not done.
Yeah.
They missed the opportunity. The second question, the really important question that could have answered this once and for all for everybody, was the RFRA question, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act question, which imposes.
We were hoping they'd get rid of that.
Exactly, which
or
reimposes the strict scrutiny on these types of matters. Mm-hmm. And they could have evaluated this under RFRA and said, this policy actually violates this statute, RFRA, and therefore is null and void. But they didn't do that.
And they could have maybe gotten 5-4 on that, but who knows?
I think they would have.
Yeah,
they would have.
Kelly? Yeah.
Yeah, we would have had. Look, what happens is when Kagan and Breyer see that the conservatives are about to issue a very strong ruling, they come along and say, hey, we'll come with you if you'll just rule on this. And so in this case, everybody's, oh, great, Little Sisters won. Well, they won this case, but they didn't win the whole case because now they've got to go back down.
Yeah.
And they've got to go, well, did you follow the Administration Procedures Act and how you did this exemption for them?
And there we go again.
And they never answered the question of, does it violate religious freedom and the Religious Freedoms Restoration Act to force nuns to have, contraception and abortion-causing drugs? And they should have answered that because they could have answered it, gotten a good decision, a strong religious freedom decision, but it was avoided. So it's a victory, but it could have been an even stronger victory.
Explain the difference, because some people said, well, wasn't that also the Hobby Lobby case and this one? Because in some respects, these are two different categories, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. This is different in that this is about, in this case, you had the government actually come forward and say, because, you had 100 of these lawsuits going on, and we had clients at First Liberty,
right. Yes.
Chuck Swindoll's ministry, that it was like, you have to provide abortion for your employees. And it was like, well, that ain't going to happen, okay? Because biblically, I'm not going to do that. And so there were hundreds of these groups, all of these lawsuits out there. As soon as Trump came into office, his administration said, this is going to end. They provided an accommodation saying, look, if you have an objection, a religious or moral objection to this, you're not forced to violate your conscience and faith. And so what happened? You think, well, that ends it, right? No, what happened is liberal states like Pennsylvania and others who had liberal leadership said they sued. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just amazing to me. They sued the president and the administration saying, you can't provide exemptions to people. You should force them all to violate their faith. You're like, what? So, and the Little Sisters of the Poor are like the ones they're talking about. And you're like, you people are nuts. And that's, you have to be really extreme to end up with 7-2 at the Supreme Court at this point. But that's what they did. So that's why this one is different. This is just about, can the government say, hey, we know we've got this program that we think is really neat, but we're actually going to recognize that you religious groups don't have to violate your faith to be a part of our program. And that's pretty unremarkable, or it should have been unremarkable. But obviously now you have to fight over even that basic thing.
So it goes back to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and state of New Jersey, and we'll see where that goes. And, of course, Lathan, that's one of the things we've seen a lot with the Supreme Court, in particular Chief Justice Roberts, the decision not to decide, to try to say whether we look at DACA, well, maybe the procedure wasn't quite followed, or in this case, did they actually follow the procedure? These are such sort of incremental steps that sometimes you guys that are looking for a big victory, and you've had some, don't seem to be getting quite as many of those.
Yeah, and I think it really does a disservice to the American people.
I think so.
You can, there are lots of cases where you can find a technicality to rule on and kick it back down and completely avoid the substantive issue, the real merits of the case. And that's not what you were put on the bench for life to do. Okay? You are given this position. You are not held accountable by the voters. You are given that sort of immunity to public opinion for a reason, to make big decisions, not to make policy, but to state what the policy is and whether or not the preferred policy is in keeping with the Constitution. If it's not, then it's up to the people to, via the electoral process and their elected representatives, to go back and make the policy they want in a way that conforms with the Constitution. You're not up there to find the least offensive way to rule on something. It's okay if your decision makes people mad. Okay, they have avenues available to them if they don't like your decision. But I think it's been very clear from even his confirmation hearing and ever since that he is so concerned about the reputation of the court and how people view the court that it's like you're missing the forest for the trees. Just do your job. Okay, that's not doing it.
Yeah, it's almost like in an effort to protect the view of the court as being fair, he's making it clear that the court is political and not being a court.
Yes,
and it's really sad to see. And then the more the liberals say we're going to pack the court, we're going to change the law, we're going to destroy the Supreme Court, it makes him more, worried about that and more, of a politician instead of a judge. It really is sad.
Well, I was just thinking that if indeed Joe Biden becomes the next president and he puts on Eric Holder as a Supreme Court justice or Lawrence Tribe, or I'll just pick a few names like that I don't think they're going to be real tentative about what they're going to want to do. So we kind of know how the game gets played on both sides. But let's take a break, and we may get to some of these other court cases, but this one I thought we might cover this hour just because it was kind of intriguing in terms of the Little Sisters of the Poor. And I guess we're just still going to see them lining up time and time again. Just a sad commentary. But some of us are politically active, and will there be a Texas Republican convention? And are Texas kids going back to school? We'll talk about that right after this.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts with us. And since so many of you that are listening this hour are in the state of Texas, we thought we might talk about Texas. But whether you're a Texan or not, a lot of the things we're going to talk about really relate to you. One is the Texas Republican Convention was scheduled to be next week, and Kelly was going to be there, and I had my doubts of whether I was going to be there, although both of us are delegates. And so that has now been canceled by the mayor, so I want to talk about that in Houston. Also, the question about reopening the schools. This is more than just a Texas issue, but it is interesting. Representative Jim Banks has introduced a piece of legislation, Reopen Our Schools Act, in Congress, and so that's an issue. And we also recognize that Texas has certainly seen a remarkable increase in the number of infections, but we also recognize that some of this has been poorly reported. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention themselves sometimes conflated both antibody test and viral test. What's the difference? An antibody test tells you whether you have ever been infected. A viral test tells whether you are currently infected. When you conflate the two, you've got some real issues. So there are just a lot of topics. But Kelly, you were going to be at the Texas Republican Convention next week. I don't know what's going to happen. Do you?
Well, nobody does. Essentially, for those who don't know how all this works, and every state's a little different, but in Texas, there's a precinct. You live in a precinct, very small group. And so typically what would happen is after they did it differently this year, but after the election is over, the night of the election, the primaries, you would go later that night at 7 after the polls close, and your precincts would meet, Democrat, Republican, and you would vote from there. Who do you want to go from your precinct to the next level, which is the senatorial district? You have 31 senators in Texas in the state Senate. And so you split up the state by that. And then when you go to the senatorial district, and by the way, you can pass items for the platform and all that. And then those are pushed forward to that next convention. You go to the senatorial district and you do the same thing. You meet, you elect who do you want to go from that group to the state convention. And you pass out platform items you want to go to the state convention. And then there's a state convention. Now, the Texas Republican State Convention is the largest political convention in the world. 7,000, probably 10,000 people show up, but I think 6,000 delegates or something like that. And that's a lot of people, right? And this was going to be and by the way, why do you do that? Because in a presidential election year like this, at that convention, the Texas convention will say, here's our platform for the state of Texas. And they will say, here are the people we are sending to the national convention as our delegates, the ones that will make up the voting people at the national convention that pick the nominee, which, of course, everybody knows who is going to be on the Republican side, and also develops the platform and everything else. So you got to, for instance, vote on who your electors are. Those people that make those official votes. I mean, there is official business that has to be done at the state convention. But do you have to have 7,000 people coming together? And by the way, the convention was scheduled for Houston, one of the biggest hot spots right now in the country. And the head of the Texas GOP, James Dickey, had really tried to make sure that they would have it. And the executive committee, SREC, voted to have it there. And so he tried to make it with social distancing and all the different things to make it to where they could do it. The problem is the mayor of Houston is a Democrat, and he didn't like this idea, and he doesn't like the Republican Party either. So all of a sudden, here we are, a week out, he all of a sudden said, nope, not going to happen. And so a lawsuit was filed. They filed the lawsuit in state court in Houston. Well, if you understand anything about politics, you know that probably was not a winning move at the first level. So they lost in Houston. Again, all Democrat judges. And now they've done an emergency appeal to the Texas Supreme Court, and the Texas Supreme Court will decide whether they get to meet in person in Houston at the convention, which most people doubt. Or, even if you don't think it's a good idea as a judge, you still are going to defer to the political people typically to make decisions when it involves this many people, a hot spot, and, people possibly dying. So I mean, most people think they'll probably say no. And then at that point, the Republican Party will have to figure out. They've already got a backup of supposedly doing a virtual, but there's ideas of maybe you have people meet in their local senatorial districts like they did earlier.
Yeah.
So there's different options, but there's business that'll have to be done. People had to be elected, to the national convention on who goes to. Of course, now is there going to be a national convention, in Jacksonville? I mean, so it's.
And that moved from Charlotte, right?
They have already moved from Charlotte.
Because the mayor and the governor are there, so there we go again.
And then there's another issue of the platform.
Yes.
I mean, the platform, I've been on the platform committee a number of times. David Barton, our friend David Barton, has been on. And I was just talking to David Barton about this today. It's a mess right now because what they voted on the national is that they were going to have, they were going to stick with the platform from 4 years ago. Well, the problem is there's a lot of stuff that's not really good in there anymore. I mean, for instance, at the time it would say something negative about the president because that was Obama at the time. Now it wouldn't look so good to have that be about Trump speaking about himself. You also don't have, you would put in these things a list of accomplishments in addition to the platform position. So nobody's sure because at this point what they've said is we can't meet to do the platform committee and therefore we're just sticking with this past one. There will be no platform committee and we'll just go to the convention and do. So nobody's sure what's happening because everything is so different and everything is so changing because of course, being in the pandemic right now.
I always like to come to Lathan because you've been involved in some campaigns, and to run on a campaign with an old platform doesn't exactly sound like the ideal situation.
It's not, but, think about campaign commercials, campaign speeches, campaign appearances. How many times do you ever hear a candidate of either party stand up and say,
this is what the platform says? Yeah,
I'm going to run on this platform because this platform says no. They get up and they tell you what they believe on issues. And so there is some official business that has to get done, like the electors. That's part of the Electoral College. That has to be done.
Yeah.
Some of the rest of this, you honestly, you can do without.
Yeah.
Now,
and we've all been to these where there are just lots and lots of speeches. And I love the speeches, but let's be honest, it's not where the work's being done. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's not to say that the platform isn't important. It is. People want to, especially from the grassroots level all the way up to the national level, have a say in what the party says it officially stands for. But, in today's sort of modern political world, that presidential candidate is the de facto leader of that party, and he goes out and he tells you what he believes, where he stands or she, and people tend to, fall in line behind it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a little awkward to have, a very old party platform, but nobody's going to expect that Donald Trump's going to get up and read from the platform when he makes a speech at the national convention, whatever that ends up being, if that's indoors, outdoors, virtual, whatever.
And we know these candidates, but still, it's kind of helpful sometimes to recognize how liberal and really radical the Democratic platform might have been, and how the Republican platform under Donald Trump would have talked about accomplishments and maybe even set an agenda, because everybody sort of looks at him right now and say, okay, I saw what you did over the last 3.5 years. What are you going to do for me in the future? And that's part of what she's going to have to do in the campaign.
Joe Biden, I think this week, released what essentially was the platform and had, it was kind of like the goodie list of
unbelievable.
I mean, it was a progressive, not progressive, I'm being nice. It was really the AOC wing of the crowd, the Bernie Sanders, the socialism kind of wing got its way to just put everything in there that they kind of wanted. And so it's clear that Joe Biden, the old Joe Biden, who is more, compared to them, would be considered a moderate, is clearly, his agenda is not that. His agenda is so, pulled so left that, as you mentioned earlier, he even has to come out and speak against the Little Sisters of the Poor. So he's definitely going a different direction than he normally does. But his platform, I think it was 120 some odd pages or something. So that's...
We're going to post it. We're going to post all these ones and everything. Yeah. And back to the point you've made, I did a commentary the other day just talking about the fact that it used to be that you run to the extremes in the primary, run to the middle in the general election. And the one real outstanding exception is Joe Biden. And I want to come back after the break because I remember somebody else doing that. I think his name was George McGovern. Now, this guy's too young to remember that, but you and I maybe remember that. And that makes a difference when instead of running to the middle, you run to further and further and further to the left. We'll see. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
After some depressing rulings, it was great to get a win for religious liberty and school choice at the U.S. Supreme Court. The 5-4 decision means states that provide assistance to private schools may not exclude some solely because they are religious. In Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue, the court affirmed by a slim margin that the Constitution prohibits explicit religious discrimination. In 2015, the state of Montana established a program in which businesses could receive tax credits for their donations to an exchange that provided modest scholarships, no more than $150 each, to low-income private school students. The Montana Department of Revenue refused to allow the scholarship money to be used at religious schools. A group of mothers sued the Department of Revenue, claiming its action violated their First Amendment free exercise rights. A district court agreed with the mothers. The Montana Supreme Court did not. Rather than restrict the tax credit to secular schools, the Montana Supreme Court shut it down. About 70% of private schools in Montana are religious. The Department of Revenue based its position opposing scholarships to religious schools on the Montana Blaine Amendment that prohibits state funding of churches or religious schools. Blaine amendments are part of many state constitutions. The amendments are named after Senator James Blaine from Maine, who in 1875 tried to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution as a way to prevent Catholic schools from receiving any type of federal money. That effort did not succeed, but 38 states enacted Blaine amendments. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the Espinoza opinion. In it, he stated a state need not subsidize private education, but once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools because they are religious. The decision is a huge victory for families. States may no longer prevent those participating in school choice programs from choosing religious schools, often the very best option. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and then we'll have our national program starting at 1 o'clock. But I thought just while we were talking about this and the importance of platforms, I took us back to 1972, and that's George McGovern. We'll go back to 1984 if you want to do that. And those are two times when the Democrat won one state and the opponent, whether it was Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan, won 49. And in both cases, but especially in 1972, there wasn't even an attempt attempt to try to look moderate, but to go further and further to the left, not only anti-Vietnam War, but all sorts of other very radical ideas, which even to this day, in some cases, might still be somewhat radical, although things have changed over time. And you've been kind of a student of history and watching that, and you've said before, I think on this program, that you see a lot of parallels between this year, 2020, and 1972. Why?
I do. I think 72 and a little bit of 68 thrown in there also, but 72 and McGovern specifically, where I think some of the mistakes that the Democrats made in 72, you can sort of see a similar pattern in this cycle. I think they had sort of convinced themselves that everybody hated Nixon as bad as they did.
Yes.
And that
and everybody was against the Vietnam War as much as they were.
Exactly. And if you look at the news coverage, number one, you didn't have 5,200 news networks like we do now. There were a handful, and the perspective of all of them was pretty much the same. And you can say we're more polarized in media now than we were then, but I think they had sort of talked themselves into this notion that nobody's going to. There's no way we can lose to Nixon this time.
Yes.
And because of that,
there was no hiding the agenda.
Right.
That's what
this is almost like a guaranteed win for us. So we should really take advantage of this and put our farthest left guy that we think we probably never could get elected in another cycle. Here's our chance to get him. So here you go, McGovern. And it turns out not everybody, was as displeased with Nixon as they thought, or they may have been displeased with Nixon, but they took one look at McGovern and were like, nope. Okay, if you had put a viable alternative, then I might have listened to you, but this guy is off the deep end, and so they ended up voting for Nixon again, and Nixon was 49 out of 50 states. Now, I don't think Trump
that's happened.
or anybody in the rest of my lifetime is going to win 49 out of 50 states. However, if you look at what was going on in the presidential primary for the Democrats, why do you think that primary was as crowded as a Chick-fil-A next to a Southern Baptist convention, right? Everybody thought, all I got to do is win the primary. There's no way we're going to lose to Trump again, right? That same sort of idea that they had about Nixon. And so they went as hard left as I've ever seen, a party move that quickly. And they were already pretty far out there after 8 years of Obama and Biden, but they went even further. And somehow the dust settled on Joe Biden as the reasonable, like the voice of reason at this table. And yet here he is. He has embraced all of the radical positions of
Certainly
the people
has.
that he beat in the primaries. And that's why I think they may be setting themselves up for another surprising outcome like they had in 72.
The only difference is that Biden isn't the liberal that McGovern was. He's
True.
He's an empty shell. They're filling his shell with extreme AOC, Bernie. This is the Bernie platform, the Bernie deal now. So that's interesting. The thing I find interesting about a lot of the stuff that when we come in and talk about on Friday is, to me, the biggest issues are always the sort of what's being missed or what people are not talking about. They always talk about Trump, and all year, every year, this approach, and this is kind of a little bit of what you're referring to, Lathan, there's this attitude of attacking Trump that's always like, well, now we've shown, you that you shouldn't like Trump. And the assumption is that all these people all these people come out and they say bad things about Trump. Now, what I find is that when you ever ask those people, they didn't vote for Trump in the first place. Okay, everybody knew all the stuff about Trump going into it. And so the big question, and you never see this in polling and anything, is how many people voted for Trump who have said they're not voting for him? Mm-hmm. I think it's close to zero. Now, if it is, and if there are more people, because I have seen a lot of people who have said, I didn't vote for him, I didn't like him. But now that I've seen what he's done, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm going to vote for him next time, even though I still don't like him. I just like what he's doing. If that's the case, then, that's a pretty powerful, way to win elections, right? Unless you just register so many new people on the other side that hated Trump and didn't vote last time. But I never see that talked about. And the same thing in this COVID-19, and I know we'll talk about this later, more later, but when we got into all this about what we were going to do, the shutdowns, the everything, the purpose was always to not overwhelm the hospitals. The purpose was never that we're going to stop this thing, that we're going to reduce the number of deaths. It was that we're going to flatten the curve so that all the deaths and hospitalizations don't occur at one time where people die because we don't have capacity. Well, now it's like everybody's forgotten what the purpose was, right? Now it's like, well, all people are dying. It's like, yes, that's what happens in a pandemic, and the shutdowns don't stop that from happening. They stop. The goal is we don't want our healthcare system to be overwhelmed. We now have extra resources. We can shuttle things from one part of the country to the other. It's like everybody's lost. And I mean, including the president and everybody around him. Mm-hmm. Everybody's it's like they're not talking about the right thing. They're kind of being, led into, and it's almost like somebody should shake them and go, hey, this isn't the purpose. And so it's interesting how both with the elections and with the coronavirus, that people are just talking and thinking about all the wrong things. Again, I wish we could stop, everybody from getting the coronavirus, but it's not going to happen. I mean, it's going to spread. And it's like there's a new goal now that really is an unattainable goal, and so I you wish people would talk about the things they should be talking about and analyze the things they should be analyzing, but instead they're either intentionally or they're just blissfully foolish in how they're analyzing what they're looking at.
One of the arguments for being a conservative is that you've been watching our bureaucrats up there, Anthony Fauci, I'll just pick on him for a minute, who on the one hand says, I think it would be a mistake to send kids to school. Now, this the other day said, I think if we kept them home, that would be worse. And we should have masks. No, we shouldn't have masks. And the Surgeon General and everything. And after a while, you'd say, and you want these people controlling more of your life, which is what would happen under a Democratic president, right?
Right. And another point about Biden in the whole analogy to 72 and McGovern, I agree with what Kelly said. I don't think that he is the ideological leftist that McGovern was.
No,
I do think that he's more of a just finger in the wind. He's a political operator. But where that is going to, I think, come back to haunt him is he has been in D.C. for 44 years. He's now been on just about every side of the issue, regardless of whatever the issue is that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So if he tries to attack Trump on something that's going on right now in a debate setting, the very easy response from the Trump campaign was, well, you've been here for 40 years. What did you do about it?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, you were on the other side of this, Joe, when the first time it came around in your career. I know you haven't had a real job in your life. You've been in D.C. this entire time. He's going to have so much explaining to do, and he doesn't right now appear to be capable of explaining much of anything.
Yes. And Newt Gingrich put it this way: after 48 years in Washington, Joe Biden will now fix everything he failed to fix for half a century. Good line. Let's take a break. Newt. We've got a lot more to cover right after this.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that point of view is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347 5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME, pointofview.net/time, or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and we have a lot to cover today. Let me just mention that we have a couple of articles, one on the Supreme Court rulings on religious liberty. We're going to pick out one or two of those because there were so many successes, and we'll get into that. Got a piece here about what's going to happen with these Republican conventions, either at the state or even at the national level, talking about an outdoor convention. The real cancel culture. Donald Trump teaches history was one that we posted because in some respects we see a very striking difference in terms of history from the speech given by Donald Trump in front of Mount Rushmore and then the shorter speech given by Joe Biden. So we'll talk about that. Antifa, however you want to pronounce it. I yesterday did a commentary on that. We have some material there as well. And so we have in the studio with us Kelly Shackelford, the president and CEO of First Liberty. We also have Lathan Watts, who's the director of public affairs. Next hour, Jacki Deason will be joining us as well. So this is going to be great. And she'll maybe brighten up the place with her enthusiasm and her looks, but if nothing else, Kelly, I want to get to a case which we just mentioned, but it has profound implications to almost all of our listeners that are going to church. Maybe they have kids that go to a Christian school, and that is the Our Lady of Guadalupe case, because in this case, the Supreme Court, surprisingly, 7-2, ruled that religious schools can actually pick their own teachers.
Yeah, a very important case. I was kind of expecting the ruling to go down the way it did, but this is what's called the ministerial exception. We have laws that deal with discrimination in the workplace, federal laws, Title VII, and they applied all across the country to any business, nonprofit or for-profit, that has 16 or more employees. And they say things like you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, and of course we had the big decision about transgenderism, right, recently, and right. LGBT, and all of a sudden that was read into that statute, so that's going to be applying all over the country. The question is, though, well, what about like a church? Well, how can the Catholic Church have these priests and they don't allow women priests? Isn't that discrimination? Well, it's because we have what's called the ministerial exception, which is religious groups have to have the ability, this is under both religion clauses, religious groups have to have the ability to pick their own leaders and the people that, really promulgate the mission, the religious mission. I mean, can you imagine saying to, the Jewish synagogue, oh, you can't exclude the Baptist minister as your next rabbi because that would be religious discrimination, or to tell the Catholic Church, well, you can't just be considering men for the Pope. I mean, you can't have the government interfering. It really, the whole point of religious groups is to have the autonomy to be who they are. And you can join that group if you want to. You can join another group. If the government sort of begins to sort of do a one-size-fits-all of what it wants, then it really takes away everybody's choice. To really follow the religion that they and the beliefs that they have. So the question has been, there was a case a number of years ago, the Hosanna Tabor case, which made that clear. But the question is, okay, there's this ministerial exception that religious groups get to pick their own leaders, but what does it take to be a minister? Who is a minister? So in this case, what happened in Our Lady of Guadalupe is you had a Catholic teacher at school who was fired, and then she tried to bring an employment action, and they said ministerial exception, and her response was, well, I'm not a minister, I'm not the priest, I'm not, and so the question is, does it include teachers? And I think obviously it should, and the decision came down yes. I mean, if these are the people that are transferring the religious beliefs of the organization to the children, of course you have to have the ability to have those people picked by the religious entity and not government officials through some statute or whatever else they're wanting to do. So this is basic religious autonomy. Religious autonomy is sort of like there is a sanctity of the church that the government may not enter. Mm-hmm. It can't tell you who your leaders are, what your doctrine can be, or who your members are or are not. Those are areas that the government has zero jurisdiction or competence or expertise. They have no. Now, I've been in cases with judges who didn't know about this because it's kind of a specialized area, a little bit of the law. You're not used to dealing with these cases. Very quickly, you can bring them into the situation where it starts to dawn on them that they're now having to make all these decisions that are highly inappropriate for them. Yeah. And it's like watching fear, come into their eyes.
For which they have no expertise. Because by definition, the secular government does not have expertise in religious education, right?
And so when you bring them to that, almost every judge immediately realizes, you are right, I have no jurisdiction here. Because at first it can look like, well, I'm just applying the civil rights law. No, you're now picking the religious leaders of the church in this case. You're telling them who can transfer the religious mission to their children. And you start extrapolating that, and they begin to realize pretty quickly. So this is a very good decision for every religious organization in the country. They now have more freedom to pick the people who transmit the mission of their organization and of their faith. And so this is a good case to protect them in the future should anybody try to threaten them with, hey, we're going to sue you for this or that or the other because of, how you chose this person to work for you or even the fact that you fired this person because they don't transmit your religious beliefs or your values that your organization is behind.
Lathan, one of the questions that people have asked is, Sotomayor, who was one of those dissenters, said, well, yes, but lots of times they were teaching secular subjects. But, we've had Senator Angela Paxton here. She was a math teacher, and I'll guarantee you, if she was sitting here right now, she'd say, even when I taught math, there was a Christian perspective. So this idea of secular subjects that can be taught without a Christian worldview, well, that's kind of what a Christian school or a parochial school is really all about.
That's why people choose to send their kids to these schools, because they want their faith spoken about, talked about, discussed, nurtured, strengthened in every classroom. Mm-hmm. Not just when they go to, quote, Bible class, but when they're taking history or math or science or all of these things. That's why people make the choice to pay tuition to a private parochial school that is in keeping with their faith, because they know how much time a student spends in school Monday through Friday versus how much time they spend at home or in church on Sunday. And it is a way to help build that student's faith. So absolutely, these parochial schools expect teachers to be able to guide these students in their faith, regardless of what subject they're teaching, whether it's math or science or history or English or whatever it may be. And so, yes, it's almost as if there should be a wall of separation between church and state when it comes to churches being able to run the church. That's what the Establishment Clause is about, and it's the Free Exercise Clause as well. It's like Kelly said, it's both clauses of the First Amendment. And so, you're basically offering the judges, here's a real easy way out. You don't have to get involved in any of this.
Yeah. Well, again, religious schools win, which is the title of Penna Dexter's commentary, and that's a different case, which is from last week, Espinoza and Montana. We'll talk about that briefly, and then move on to some other topics right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
For decades, most people knew Bono as a musician with the group U2 and a social activist. But today, many of his fans would be surprised to hear him promote some of the benefits of capitalism. At a World Economic Forum, he made this observation. Capitalism is not immoral, it's amoral. It requires our instruction. Capitalism has taken more people out of poverty than any other ism. But it is a wild beast, and if not tamed, can chew up a lot of people along the way. As you can see, he isn't a complete supporter of the free market, but he is willing to give some appreciation for what capitalism has done to reduce extreme poverty. Hugh Welcho, who is the executive director of the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, begins his essay with this quote from Bono. He then goes on to document something I've talked about with a number of economists and theologians on the Point of View radio talk show. Capitalism has been able to raise more than 1 billion people around the world out of extreme poverty. On one of my radio programs, I quoted a Barna survey of Americans. 3/4 of those surveyed believed that world poverty had increased. Only 7% thought it decreased. Scott Todd, in his book Hope Rising, reminds us that in 1981, a majority of the developing world's population lived in extreme poverty. That percentage has been cut by more than half. Hugh Welcho reminds us that in a recent Gallup poll, it shows that a majority of young people favor socialism over capitalism. The increased visibilities of members of Congress who openly describe themselves as socialists suggest that the percentage of young people embracing socialism might increase. These young people need to pay attention to Bono and the world economic statistics that demonstrate the power of a free market to relieve poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One more example of religious schools that have been so successful in the Supreme Court decisions is the Penedexter Commentary, which you'll be able to hear in about a half an hour if you don't. Or, of course, you can subscribe and receive it. And this one is about the case known as Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue. And this was in a situation where you have a lot of private schools which were qualified for a scholarship that had been provided. And yet about 70% of those private schools in Montana are religious. And so let me come to you, Lathan. The argument is if you're going to provide a scholarship for a private school, and it wasn't a lot, most of the times it was like $500 at most, it was more the principle of the thing, then you can't say, well, it only can go to a secular private school and it could not go to a religious private school. Is that what the decision is?
Well, yes. I mean, basically, once you open, you don't have to have a school choice program in your state.
No.
But if you do,
yeah.
If you do, and you provide these scholarships, and scholarships go to the student, or the parent, basically, to choose then where they use that money. So if you have this type of program in your state, then you cannot prohibit parents from choosing a religious school to use that scholarship at. Now, Montana shut the entire program down rather than have this scholarship money be used at a religious school.
Which is amazing to me. It's like
the
Equal Access Act. Sometimes they say you're supposed to provide for a Bible club. Well, if we have to provide for a Bible club, we won't have any clubs.
Shut everything down.
Right. Everybody out of the pool.
Yeah. So
it's just crazy.
So yes, if you cannot treat religion or a religious organization different than a secular organization, that goes to the Trinity Lutheran decision. If you got a grant program for playgrounds, then the church school can use that to do their playground as well. The thing that I think the most interesting part of the Espinoza decision, and a lot of times if you're kind of Supreme Court follower or a legal dork like some of us around the table are, you have the majority opinion, which kind of gives you, here's what the decision is. When you get into the concurrences, you can see where some people are taking the opportunity to say, here's what we really think, and look at Justice Thomas's concurrence in Espinoza, where he talks about,
and Alito too. If I
and
remember.
Alito, but Thomas lays out here's why he just sort of takes another opportunity to say, here's why our First Amendment free exercise and Establishment Clause jurisprudence is a mess.
Yes.
And he talks about this sort of action, what Montana did in using the threat or the worry over violating the Establishment Clause as a defense against a free exercise claim.
Yeah.
Like these parents have a free exercise claim, right? And you're using this, well, we don't want to violate the Establishment Clause as a way to justify violating the free exercise clause. And it's a really, really great, well-written concurrence. And then Alito, there was a previous case that he didn't really like the way it came out, and he wrote a blistering dissent about it, how they had used the original intent of behind a certain statute to say that it was now unconstitutional, even though they had amended it. And he said, well, since that's now the controlling point of view around here, let's talk about the original intent of the Blaine Amendments. And then he goes into the entire history of the anti-Catholic bias of these types of amendments that Montana was basically using to rule out this school program.
Yeah, I wanted to get Kelly's comments because he's educated us, but Senator James Blaine from Maine, actually at that time, back in the late 19th century, 1875 in particular, tried to get an amendment to the United States Constitution. It went nowhere, but educate us on this, because one of the most pernicious legal issues or even legislative issues are these Blaine amendments that showed up in about 3/4 of the state constitutions.
Yeah, the best way I can put this is Christians sometimes get what they deserve, which is kind of a shame. I mean, the whole point of Jesus is that we really need to not get what we deserve. But in this case, we did, because what happened is Protestants had control in America of everything. And so if you were Catholic, I mean, if you went to the public school, you had prayers, and it was just kind of all Protestant. And so if you were Catholic and wanted a different approach than Protestant, you formed parochial schools. Mm-hmm. And so, again, showing their intolerance and their really religious discrimination, which, again, this whole thing reminds me of Jesus saying, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because what they did is the Protestants thought, well, we'll just show the Catholics, because what we'll do is we'll pass these laws in our state constitutions that say that if any money ever touches these religious schools, they're unconstitutional, knowing that the only religious schools are the Catholic schools. And we'll still have our Protestant schools called public schools. Yeah. And so that intolerance and that discrimination now is being used against their Protestant schools too.
Very true.
But the point of this is these things are insidious. They're wrong. They're hateful. They're intolerant. They're religious bigoted. They were born out of bigotry. They violate religious freedom. And the only sad thing in this opinion is it's a good opinion in that it says, look, you can't treat religious schools differently than non-religious schools. That's discrimination. But I wish they would have gone the whole way and said, all of these Blaine amendments, they're unconstitutional. Yeah. But they didn't do that, so we're going to have more of this until someday somebody says these Blaine amendments are bad and they violate the Constitution.
But again, each one of these decisions is saying we don't treat religion in a special way, in terms of free exercise. And so that's, I think, a very encouraging sign. And if nothing else, it brings us to something, Kelly, that you've noticed, and that is when you look at some of the issues that are top of mind for some of the voters, religious liberty is still in the top 3, isn't it?
Yeah, the polling that's going on, I don't know how much of this has been released, but I've seen a number of very, very significant in-depth polling, and what it's showing is something we've never seen. The number one issue right now is actually the fake media and the fact that the information we're getting is false. And everybody can see right through the bias. I mean, in the old days, at least people tried to look objective, right? They don't even try to look objective anymore. And people are disturbed by this. They think one of the biggest issues for what is the biggest issue for our country. Number 2 issue for people is the Second Amendment and their own protection. That's because of all this stuff that's going on with the protesting that goes into riots, that has gone into marching through people's neighborhoods and people having to defend themselves, and the police being, basically pushed away from defending people and defunded and all this. So the number 2 is really the personal protection, the Second Amendment rights. Number 3 is religious freedom. Again, they've been in this pandemic. They've watched these churches being discriminated against, being closed. They know that the church is the real answer to these things. So interesting, those 3 issues are the top issues, which is not normal. And so I think if you watch, you'll start seeing the campaigns probably began to try to speak to those issues. Certainly Donald Trump has been heavy on at least, well, all 3 of those. I mean, he's been the one calling out the fake media, et cetera. But I think the second one is a big one, opportunity, I think, for Trump, because one of his weaknesses has been that his abrasive nature has pushed away a lot of suburban women. But the number 1 issue for suburban women is their safety of their families, their children, and the law and order and the bringing protection to people message of the president could really resonate with him. So it is a very unusual time as far as what are the top issues versus normally what the top issues are.
I might just mention the next hour we'll probably get into this. One of the articles we've posted, which I just called it Antifa Tactics and Arrests, the actual has, here's what that imaginary Antifa and radical leftists have been doing. And then you mentioned this. This was one that comes from our friends in Georgia. Heavily armed black militia marches through suburban city demanding reparations from whites. And, of course, the whole issue of defunding the police. So there's just a lot of issues we will get to. Let me just mention, since we're coming to a break, that some of you have been wondering how we've been doing on the matching fund. And you might remember that we had one matching fund, which we completely fulfilled on June 30th. But thankfully, one of the individuals that also provided a matching fund, and that would be Foster Free, said, well, I'll give you till July 15th, which is next Wednesday. By the way, that's when your taxes are due if you haven't already turned those in. And I've been trying to give you an update each day, and so far towards that $100,000 match, that is $87,177. So we have about $12,000 and a little bit more remaining. So if you have been saying, well, I'd like to help put you over the top, we would love to hear from you. And you can do that even as we go to the break. We have that $100,000 matching fund, which will extend till next Wednesday. But we only have a few days left to bring in that $12,000, and then we'll be done with it. So let me just mention that there is a banner on the website, pointofview.net. Number 2, of course, we have the line that you can call in case you'd like to pledge an amount, 800-347-5151. And, of course, the address is Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas, 75221. We'll be right back.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts with us, and I thought we might talk for just a minute about this idea of a cancel culture, because it's a good illustration of how some of the intolerance on a college campus has made its way into our culture. And I am going to see a theme here, because later on we'll talk about whether or not Antifa is imaginary. That's what at least one member of Congress is saying. And there are people saying this idea of a cancel culture that the president mentioned in his Mount Rushmore speech is really nothing at all. It doesn't even exist. But it seemed to exist for some individuals with some kind of visibility. J.K. Rowling, I did a commentary about her and what has happened to her so far on July 1st. And Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, B.T. Jones, Wynton Marsalis, Salman Rushdie, and a number of others have signed this letter just really calling for justice and open debate, which I don't think is asking for too much. As writers, we need a culture that leaves room for experimentation, risk-taking, even mistakes. We need to preserve the possibility of good faith disagreement without dire professional consequences. And so this is an attempt, if nothing else, to recognize that there has been a real push over these last couple of years, Kelly, as we've talked about this in big tech. And I'm going to give you lots of examples from universities in just a minute of individuals that stray just a little bit sometimes from the liberal plantation, just aren't radical enough to just have the whole world come crashing down upon them.
Yeah, this is one of my issues that sort of gets my juices flowing more than about anything. This idea, it's bullying. It's oppressive. It's the idea that it's an attempt to shut down the exchange of ideas. I mean, it goes against everything this country is about, and it's also ultimately an attack on Christianity, whether people realize it or not, because it's we don't want to have an open discussion. We don't want to let the truth win out. We want to make sure that you can't express the truth. It's really, really dangerous in lots of levels. And again, you just start with the First Amendment, and you immediately realize this is as anti-American as anything you could think. The problem is the Constitution only protects you against the government violating your free speech. And this is now being brought in even beyond the government into, people getting fired. It's a cultural, it's just a kind of a wind of the culture right now. And I particularly think it's one of cowardice. It's what I hate about it is these people feel really woke, they're really cool if they join the effort to oppress other people. And then they think they're the ones freeing people. Really, they're being cowards. They're not being, courageous, like they think, oh, I'm on the part of this great movement. No, you're being a coward. If you want to have a discussion, win the debate by the truth, not by trying to destroy people's livelihood, not by trying to shut people off. You see this all over social media right now, and I just have little patience for it because it's evil. And it's foolish, because if you again, do it to others as you would have them do unto you. Do you want to have no voice? Well, the people you're oppressing and shutting down and getting fired now, next it'll be you. It'll be your children. So this kind of stuff needs to stop, and everybody needs to stand up and speak against it, because that's what America's about, not this oppressive, bullying, shutting down a free expression. That people die when you do that, because people can't speak the truth and save lives.
Let me just mention that the third article is called The Real Cancel Culture. And in just a minute, I'm going to mention the fact that, when you look at J.K. Rowling, she'll be fine. And some of these actors and individuals will be fine. But you start looking, as I will just give you some examples in just a minute, of students that either have been expelled, not brought into the schools where they can't really defend themselves, or individuals that were fired from their position simply because they maybe ask a question about Black Lives Matter or something like that. And that's where this becomes kind of a totalitarian regime in which you have to agree with the politically correct group or you will pay a heavy price.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's Marxism is what it is. This is the Marxist revolution brought to America when they come out and say it, even though now some of them actually are saying, well, yes, we're Marxist. Traditionally, if somebody came out and just point blank said, well, yeah, I'm a communist or I'm a Marxist, well, then people stopped listening to him. So historically in the country, the Marxist movement has attached itself to other things and operated within those things. You go back, early, 20s, 30s, even on up to the 40s, 50s, they had infiltrated organized labor. Mm-hmm. Okay. Today, you see it within the racial justice movement. And now you have people within that movement who will point blank tell you, yes, I am a Marxist.
Yes, they have been.
But this is, Marxist groupthink put into practice. This is what they would do with government authority if they had it, but they use it within the culture to do it, just like Kelly was talking about. And the only response, there is no placating the cancel culture. If they don't like something that you said and you apologize, I can promise you, and you can look to examples in the article that you mentioned, if the apology isn't enough or they find something else, they just keep coming. The only response, if somebody in this operation is trying to cancel you, the only response is not to back down. It is basically to double down on whatever it is that you said that somehow offended them and say, I will not back down from it.
Yeah. I
stand by it. And the president of CEO of Goya that was at an event with the White House and said nice things about the president, and all of a sudden was hit with a boycott. We need to boycott Goya. And he, at least right now, has come out and said, no, I don't take any of it back. I meant exactly what I said, and I stand by it. Mm-hmm. That is the only way to take the power out of this sort of thing happening in the culture, is you have to stick to your guns.
Yeah, what do you do with bullies? You punch them
in the face.
You punch them in the face. I mean, they're evil. My wife and I were talking the other night. She was like reading in Psalms 11, and it said, God hates the wicked. She's like, whoa, wait, he what? And she's like, maybe I should pray this more. Am I allowed to pray this? And it talks about what God does to that. And so it's not, if you feed a bully, they become more of a bully. There's more evil. There's more people being oppressed. It reminds me of a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer that talks about that the Christian doesn't just bind the wounds of somebody crushed under the wheels of injustice. A Christian sticks a spoke in the wheels. Mm-hmm. And again, that goes against some people's kind of just their impression of, well, I should just apologize, or I should, look, you shouldn't be prideful. You shouldn't be, abusive. You shouldn't be evil, but you have to stand on truth. And when people are trying to shut down your ability to speak truth, that's going to have lots of implications. And, other people are going to get crushed under that wheel of injustice eventually. And in fact, the gospel will. So people have to stand up, speak up. I think there's more of a attitude for that. I think people are getting tired of this.
I think so too.
They know in their gut that this is wrong, that this is horrible. And they're starting to speak up and stand up. Again, you do it in a Christ-like manner, but you stand up.
That's exactly right. I think it's St. Teresa. Somebody will probably correct me if I get this wrong. Said, "Accept nothing as love if it lacks truth. Accept nothing as truth if it lacks love." Mm-hmm. That is the answer to that. When you are speaking the truth, and somebody tries to claim offense and then cancel you out of this culture, the response is to respond with more truth. And that used to be our sort of the operating assumption of debate in this country.
Right.
That the answer to speech you don't like is more speech. It is to confront that idea, defeat it in the marketplace of ideas, instead of trying to eliminate it from the marketplace of ideas. So, yeah, and just one thing about, because you mentioned J.K. Rowling. She has done more to confront the insanity that is the notion that you can pick what sex you are than I would say any conservative politician in this country, because they are afraid of the rainbow mafia and the cancel culture. Just by her saying, no, I won't apologize. There are two sexes. You're born a man or you're born a woman. And I don't make any apologies for that. She's taken more of a stand. I would assume, nice English lady who wrote books that at least one of my children is obsessed with, than really a political speaker in this country.
Yes. And let me just mention, when we were talking about bullies, yesterday we published a really good piece by Victor Davis Hanson on the fragility of the woke. And he was talking about some of these individuals have been tearing down statues and everything, and now are all upset that they might have a felony conviction on their record, or some of them were, when they were handcuffed, were just crying like little babies, or one of them that said, I'm going to stab anybody that says all lives matter. She was a Harvard graduate, and the next moment you see her in a fetal position crying her eyes out. So sometimes it really is the case that maybe just a little confrontation may be what we need to do. I'll come back and give you an example or two of the cancel culture, because a lot of people are going to say it doesn't exist. Oh, I got a pretty good list. We'll be right back.
After some depressing rulings, it was great to get a win for religious liberty and school choice at the U.S. Supreme Court. The 5-4 decision means states that provide assistance to private schools may not exclude some solely because they are religious. In Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue, the court affirmed by a slim margin that the Constitution prohibits explicit religious discrimination. In 2015, the state of Montana established a program in which businesses could receive tax credits for their donations to an exchange that provided modest scholarships, no more than $150 each, to low-income private school students. The Montana Department of Revenue refused to allow the scholarship money to be used at religious schools. A group of mothers sued the Department of Revenue, claiming its action violated their First Amendment free exercise rights. A district court agreed with the mothers. The Montana Supreme Court did not. Rather than restrict the tax credit to secular schools, the Montana Supreme Court shut it down. About 70% of private schools in Montana are religious. The Department of Revenue based its position opposing scholarships to religious schools on the Montana Blaine Amendment that prohibits state funding of churches or religious schools. Blaine amendments are part of many state constitutions. The amendments are named after Senator James Blaine from Maine, who in 1875 tried to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution as a way to prevent Catholic schools from receiving any type of federal money. That effort did not succeed, but 38 states enacted Blaine amendments. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the Espinoza opinion. In it, he stated, a state need not subsidize private education. But once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools because they are religious. The decision is a huge victory for families. States may no longer prevent those participating in school choice programs from choosing religious schools, often the very best option. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For just a few more minutes, I thought I would mention about this cancel culture, and I posted this article, and then we'll maybe get to Trump's history lesson, since I've got a history major here, which relate to it very well. And that is, it gives you some examples, because a lot of people say, oh, it's not really happening, and we have a wonderful example here of a young lady by the name of Ashley Brock, who put together a TikTok. I got a daughter who puts together TikToks. Matter of fact, 2 daughters put together TikToks. But because people didn't like that, And one of the TikToks in the back, you could see a Trump bumper sticker. All of a sudden, if you can believe this, a Baptist school, Hardin-Simmons University, decided that maybe they are not going to let her come to be on campus. And I love what one of the commentators said. You know, if she'd been expelled for doing a pro-LGBTQ TikTok, she would have been celebrated by the mainstream media. Of course, you can imagine if she had instead had one that was disagreeing with the Christian worldview, what would happen. But then they tell us all sorts of other examples. Jaden McNeil, a conservative student at Kansas State, faced expulsion. Then you had the football team saying they were going to boycott the next season if he didn't come. Then you got Missouri State University, 2 incoming students withdraw because they were being harassed because they had made some comments, which teenage boys probably could have said it better, but they were just, making some silly comments about black girls, which weren't really racist. They weren't really nice, but they weren't necessarily there. You got a principal in Vermont suspended from his job for just sharing a video which was doing a critique of anti-Black Lives Matter. It may have been a Prager one. I'm not positive about that. You have a nurse in Burlington, North Carolina, lost her job after she called Black Lives Matter a political trick to upset a group of people to riot and terrorize. Catholic priest was suspended from his duties for criticizing Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Are we seeing a theme here? California man fired for actually having his fingers like this when he drove by, which looks like the OK sign, but apparently for some people that's supposed to be a white power gesture when he was really just trying to crack his fingernails. And the list goes on and on. You can kind of just see that you can say, J.K. Rowling, she's probably not going to be hurt too much, although her publisher now is not even sure they want to publish her book. She'll find another publisher probably. But these are other people whose lives are devastated by this, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a kid that gets expelled from school,
before he gets in there, yeah.
Or enrolled and then expelled, that'll be on your record when you try to apply somewhere else.
Don't you know?
It'll be, if somebody does a quick Google search of you, if let's say that they graduated, but this controversy is still out there, there's no weaker sector of America when it comes to this issue than corporate America. So good luck getting a job.
Yeah.
When you go out trying to, apply for things, especially, fresh out of college. That's one of the first things the HR department is going to do is they're going to Google this person. They're going to look at their social media. And when they see this, that's too hot to handle.
Yeah.
Sorry.
If you have a mega hat, that's enough, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just, and you have NFL football players, quarterback in particular, I'm thinking of, for the New Orleans Saints, who simply was saying some positive things about the Pledge of Allegiance, but where we go with that? I mean, it just comes on time and time again. And like I said, NFL players, Hollywood actresses, they'll probably survive. Best-selling authors, they'll survive. But the rest of us, all it takes is one hit and you're out.
Well, and what's amazing is, like you say, that you've got these comments where these people have to apologize. They get fired. They get kicked off the team. Yet you have one of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Oh, anti-Semitic,
being incredibly anti-Semitic.
Unbelievably.
I don't see that happening there.
No.
I mean, so this is a one-sided thing too. So, but look, and people know this. It used to be that liberals were the ones who would say what I'm about to say more than even conservatives. But the way to deal with bad speech is by speech on the other side. I mean, you don't really win people over if you just crush their speech or their ability. I mean, you need to talk publicly. You need to deal with the issue. You need to win the debate, or else the society is going to be more and more divided, more and more hostile. I mean, this is why the marketplace of ideas is so important. In addition to getting the best ideas, it also brings people together because people don't just entrench, because they actually have to listen to the other side, and you have to have some thought behind what you're saying. You can't just say it and say, this is what I say, and you go to jail if you disagree. Mm-hmm. That's not the way the system works. So this is really, really damaging. I mean, as far as to America, this is a strike to the heart of what America is. And if you have this cultural approach, you will destroy America, because America is not a totalitarian place where you tell people they can't have a different opinion. Even if you don't like their opinion, you at least respect, or used to respect the ability of them to have their own opinion, and you try to convince them to move in a different direction.
And I think this is one of the reasons why this letter is starting to come out, Lathan, because you can think of Jordan Peterson and you can think of Noam Chomsky. These are not born-again evangelical conservative Christians who are saying this is gotten out of hand. And I've watched some of the debates where especially Jordan Peterson will raise these issues and how intense this has been on the campus. And then the response is, well, you're not really speaking about the alt-right. And he said, well, I do, but the point is the alt-right is not running the university. The alt-right is not running big tech right now. The alt-right is not running most of these major corporations. The liberal progressive left is, and that's where all the damage is being done.
Right, and even the people that signed on to this letter are now being canceled.
Yes.
Like the people that signed on to this, some of the, what we would say probably actually open-minded people on the left who signed on to this, who recognize just exactly what we're talking about, that you have to have the ability to express yourself. That's how you have reasoned debates, and maybe you convince somebody to join your side or not or whatever. They're now being threatened with cancellation by other people on the left who don't see the value in the exchange of ideas. So once something like this gets started, it never stops.
It looks like the French Revolution.
It's exactly right. And it gets, because you have to constantly justify yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have to constantly demonstrate that you are on the vanguard of this revolution. And so you have to keep taking the next step. And if you're, on their side and it's apologizing for being born white and privileged, then what is the next step? And it gets to this point. This is one of my favorite examples of actors and actresses who are now apologizing for playing a role,
like a transgender role.
No, I've seen two
actresses,
white actresses, who said that they will now no longer, they're voice actors for animated characters who are not white, and say they're not going to do it anymore. And so this is actors now basically saying we should not pretend to be something we're not.
Yes.
That's what acting is. That is the gig.
That is the gig. Yeah. Well, and again, that's, all these individuals have been criticized for playing a transgender role when they weren't transgender because they're cis, not trans, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just gotten out of hand. And yesterday, of course, we had James Herzen on here, and he's saying what it's doing is it's ruining Hollywood, because now you're having these individuals trying to force into various stories and roles things that don't belong there because they're trying to show that they are trendier than thou, And as like we said, you just are never radical enough, because we find some of these people just stray off of the liberal progressive plantation one step, and down comes the cancel culture. So anyway, we're going to take a break, and we're going to be joined by Jacki Deason as well, and we'll have Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts. My history major here, I want to talk about, did Donald Trump teach us something about history? I think he did, and how did that fit with Joe Biden in his same speech that day? So we'll talk about some of that and a few other issues right after these important messages.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that point of view is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time. or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour it is our, again, weekend edition, and we have with us Kelly Shackelford and Lathan Watts, who have been with us. But we've added one more individual to the roundtable, and that's Jacki Deason of the Jacki Daily Show, which you may have already had a chance to hear. We have a link to that, so you can go to her website. And again, Glenn Beck's The Blaze, as well as a number of other places where she is a part of that. Also a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We've had you by phone, but it's great to have you in studio.
Great to be here with you, sir. Thank you.
Let's, if we can, maybe get into the issue of history, which, of course, gets us into the campaign, because last week, when we didn't have a roundtable, we did have the president give this speech before Mount Rushmore. Lathan, I'll come to you first, because off air, you and I were talking about the fact that this must have been a really good speech when you just see it, all the people that criticized the speech, the Associated Press, the Washington Times, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, that all were very critical. Now, to be fair, one of the very endorsements came from the Wall Street Journal. But I posted this article on Donald Trump Teaches History. And if nothing else, it was a good possible history lesson. And I heard Eric Metaxas even said, I wish this speech could be read in public schools across the country. I know that won't happen, but you're a history major. Did the president get it right or not?
Yeah, you know, he took the opportunity to answer what people have been seeing on their televisions for the better part of a month leading up to that, which was violent mobs ripping down statues of everything from George Washington to Frederick Douglass. And he took the opportunity to express what a lot of people, I think, their natural reaction to seeing that was. And I said it, I think, the last time I was on here. You know, history is the story of people.
Yes.
And therefore it's complex, because people are complex. None of them are perfect. There's only been one perfect person on this earth. Don Lemon doesn't seem to know who that is.
You're taking that one.
Yeah. But history is complex. It is not simple, because it's the story of people.
Yes.
And for many, many weeks now, we've seen people, as I said, tearing down statues of George Washington, Frederick Douglass, Thomas Jefferson, you know, graffitiing things from like the 54th Massachusetts and Boston and all of this stuff, who are either completely ignorant of history or who have only heard one part of it.
Yes.
And Donald Trump gave them the other part, and if they were listening. And there were a lot of people who heard what he had to say about our history and about these people, and were like, well, yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I was taught growing up. And where has that been? And he's definitely sort of staked out a claim on this, on that end of the spectrum, as far as how to look at American history. So I think it is probably a little bit of him personally, and I think it's definitely part of his campaign team and his speechwriting team who saw the opportunity and took did a very good job of taking advantage of it. And you can judge how good it was by the insane reaction to it in all of these media
We've got a
outlets.
list here we can rate you. But, Kelly, what about this? Because some people have said this was a speech about American exceptionalism, and it wouldn't have been exceptional if it had even been given by the previous president.
No, I wish people would read it. You know, it's easy to do. Go online and look up Trump and Mount Rushmore speech and read it for yourself. It really kind of gives credence to the first point we're talking about with the polling. The number one issue, which is really bizarre that this is the number one issue, but it's the number one issue for Americans, is the fake media. because the response to this, I mean, if people read this and then they look at the headlines, Trump divides the country. It's almost like saying if somebody stood up and read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, and then the headline is, he's dividing the country or she's dividing the country. It's like, well, if you're dividing the country, it's because you don't like the country. You don't like who we are, our history, it's really bizarre. We just so lost journalism and integrity that they would criticize this and say it's divisive. It's just a reminder of our history and our culture and our country and what it's built on. But this whole Marxist revolution attempt, in the streets and turning statues and everything over is trying to change what that is. I none of us are going to know until the election's over, but I just really believe that there are a lot of Americans watching what's going on thinking,
shaking their heads,
what is happening? And they're silent because of the bullying and the everything that's going on. You can't express your opinion, this thing, which we've got to overturn that. I think it won't be surprising if they don't come out in droves in ways nobody's expecting for the elections, but we'll see.
Jacki, one of the most controversial statements was, no nation has done more to advance the human condition than the United States of America, and no person has done more to promote human progress than the citizens of our great nation. I didn't see that as controversial.
Okay, I'm hearing you say that, and really I'm just almost tearing up. I'm not a very emotional person, but I really believe that. And the case hasn't been made. In fact, when I heard the speech, I went online and I ordered a copy of Dinesh D'Souza's What's So Great About America,
right?
Which is one of the best expositions that lays out precisely the case that the president made. And I read it once. I thought it was an amazing book. And I've lost my copy in my many moves. I only have 3,000 books, so I lose some sometimes. But I thought 2 copies won't hurt me if they're in there. But I'll give it away as a gift because I like to keep books to give as gifts. And that message is so powerful. We all need right now to become conversant with facility in these facts to make the case, because now's the time to fight. I really feel like I found this Churchill quote I'll share with you about where we are right now if you're a conservative. He says, before the war, he says, still, if you will not fight for the right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may be a worse moment. You may have to fight when there's no hope of victory, because it is still better to perish than to live as slaves, unquote. And I feel like right now, everyone's being silent, and you sleep on your rights, you lose them. We have to speak up now. All of us. Throw everything you have at this. Give people confidence to express themselves. Some of us have to be a little more bold and courageous and take the lead. I try to do it on social media on my show, but we have to fight. I'm watching conservatives, like I went to law school with, smart, capable people, capitulating. And I'm afraid of that. That concerns me more than anything else.
Yes. One of the things we mentioned just the other day is that there is a very good piece that came out by Victor Davis Hanson, and it's on the Thursday edition. And I love what it actually says, the fragility of the woke. Lots of times, as Kelly was saying in the last hour, when you have a bully, if you confront a bully, lots of times they back down. And it's amazing how many of these people right now, they're part of the cancel culture, which we talked about, and really promoting this church of woke that we talked about yesterday with James Herzen. If you challenge them, they back down.
Absolutely. I mean, these are not courageous people. These are cowards. They can't even handle a debate in public. I mean, and I want to change the culture right now so that there's shame connected to what they're doing. That this is not American, this is anti-American, and you're a coward if you're not willing to get into a discussion and win with truth. If you want to use power to try to shut somebody else down, you're not worthy of America. And that's what the culture needs to turn back to.
When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the shock troops of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
For decades, most people knew Bono as a musician with the group U2 and a social activist. But today, many of his fans would be surprised to hear him promote some of the benefits of capitalism. At a World Economic Forum, he made this observation. Capitalism is not immoral, it's amoral. It requires our instruction. Capitalism has taken more people out of poverty than any other ism. But it is a wild beast, and if not tamed, can chew up a lot of people along the way. As you can see, he isn't a complete supporter of the free market, but he is willing to give some appreciation for what capitalism has done to reduce extreme poverty. Hugh Welchel, who is the executive director of the Institute for Faith, Work, and Economics, begins his essay with this quote from Bono. He then goes on to document something I've talked about with a number of economists and theologians on the Point of View radio talk show. Capitalism has been able to raise more than 1 billion people around the world out of extreme poverty. On one of my radio programs, I quoted a Barna survey of Americans. 3/4 of those surveyed believed that world poverty had increased. Only 7% thought it decreased. Scott Todd, in his book Hope Rising, reminds us that in 1981, a majority of the developing world's population lived in extreme poverty. That percentage has been cut by more than half. Hugh Welchel reminds us that in a recent Gallup poll, it shows that a majority of young people favor socialism over capitalism. The increased visibilities of members of Congress who openly describe themselves as socialists suggest that the percentage of young people embracing socialism might increase. These young people need to pay attention to Bono and the world economic statistics that demonstrate the power of a free market to relieve poverty. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Kelly was talking about the fact that the number one issue right now is fake news, which is a good reason to listen to Point of View or the Jacki Daily Show and things of that nature. And just to put this in perspective, Los Angeles Times out, Mount Rushmore, Trump uses 4th of July celebration to stoke a culture war. I think I know who started the culture war. Associated Press, Trump pushes racial division, flouts virus rules at Rushmore. What that has to do with anything, I don't know. Washington Post, I won't give you all of them. Mount Rushmore, Trump exploits social divisions, warns of a left-wing cultural revolution in a dark speech ahead of Independence Day. And there have been a lot of people who just said there was nothing dark about this. This was almost a Ronald Reagan speech. I grew up where he was my governor in California, then my president, and at least the Wall Street Journal said it was one of his best speeches of his presidency. But what about this dark idea? One of the other articles I've posted here has to do with Antifa and also the Black Lives Matter, in which you now have the fact that the Portland police, over the next month or so, have responded to criminal activity all over downtown Portland and other neighborhoods, causing, are you ready for this, millions of dollars of damage and threatened human life and safety. You have, of course, the pulling down of all the statues, which I can go through. Representative Jerry Nadler, though, said that Antifa is an imaginary thing on the minds of a lot of these Republicans. But how about this? The Attorney General, Bill Barr. We've already arrested over 150 people on federal charges. We have over 500 investigations underway going on across the nation focused on these hardcore instigators involved in the rioting. That's what the Attorney General Barr said the other day in a roundtable discussion in Arkansas. And then the Attorney General said that the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force is focusing on extremist groups that are potentially behind the riots. That brings us into the safety issue and the Second Amendment issue. So I know some people think they're imaginary, but the Attorney General doesn't think so.
Well, everybody knows that they're not imaginary. I mean, they're watching their TV set. They know what's going on. I think the thing that confuses people, a lot of people, is they saw this movement start and they thought, okay, there's all these people trying to protest for racial justice, something that, pretty much all Americans can get behind. And then they thought, but some people, they just got out of hand and they just rioted and there's just some bad people. And then they started watching the statues being overturned. And they're like, okay, this is really out of hand. And then they started watching them overturn statues of people that were like the people who ended slavery, and Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln and, the abolitionist, what was the one in...
Matthias?
Yeah. And it confused people because they thought they really were about racial justice. And what I thought that was a great thing as far as an unmasking, because what it did is it helped people see this is not about that. These are Marxist, and the heads of BLM have now admitted that they're Marxist.
They sure do.
And if people don't understand what that means, is the Marxist is essentially that there are two types of people in the United States: the oppressed or the oppressor. You are in one of those two classes, and whatever it is, the answer is not, let's change the laws, let's have a discussion. The answer is by pure violence and force to overthrow the government. So when you see this, when you see, statues of people who ended slavery being overthrown, that shows you what this is really about and the people that are really behind this.
Let me come to you, Jacki, because one of the questions that people have had about the Trump campaign is he going to be able to get the votes from the white suburban housewife? And when you see this, I'll hold this up for people to see, because you haven't seen what this looks like. For our listeners in Georgia, and we do have listeners in Georgia, you have these heavily armed black militia marches. This one came through Stone Mountain. These individuals are carrying AR-15s, shotguns, shouting Black Power slogans. I was born in Berkeley, and I remember seeing some of that with the Black Panthers, but I haven't seen anything like that. And I think the people in Georgia are going, what in the world? This would certainly encourage you to maybe go out and exercise your Second Amendment rights. And second of all, as we'll get to in just a minute, maybe rethink this idea of defunding the police. What's your thoughts?
I would say that the president's job just got a lot easier with women, and particularly mothers, and not just white suburban women, although that had been a problem for him in the past 3 years, for sure, for other reasons that have nothing to do with the present problems. He's had an image problem with women, some women, for a while. But I think on security, I just believe it's unanimous. White mothers, black mothers, Hispanic mothers, Asian mothers, other mothers want their children safe. It's universal. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants this. And I really believe there are probably plenty of people in the black community who are saying, you know what? This is scary. I don't want my son out there toting around a weapon. He's going to end up dead or in jail, as some have in some of these protests. Nobody wants their kids in those neighborhoods. I really believe it has to be true that there's a huge underlying backlash, because fear is the most powerful emotion for most people. Not everybody. If you're a Christian, maybe not. There's a big ethic in the Christian faith to not let fear lead your life. But for a lot of people, it's powerful. And they're going to want law and order. And I actually think that the president has lost some of his base. Not really lost the vote, but lost their enthusiasm because he hasn't been strong enough. But I really think that that's totally well thought out, because the other side wants a Kent state to ride to November. That's what they're after. They haven't got it, and they're not going to get it because, frankly, the president doesn't really get to deploy troops wherever he wants, whenever he wants. The Constitution doesn't permit that. He's actually observing a constitutional line whereby the governors are really in charge of health and safety, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's rioting. That's their job. Now, if they get overrun, If the governor gets assassinated, if the legislature's bombed, if there's an invasion, if they request his presence, that's different. In those instances, he could go in and do something. But short of that, if I were advising him, I would say, you know what? Stand down. Be very strong on the federal monuments, the federal properties. See, that's what they did. They knew that he wasn't going to be provoked in Seattle. So in Portland, they attacked the federal courthouse, attacked the Secret Service in D.C. Those are his areas. He can do something there. So that's a tough call for what to do.
Since we mentioned Seattle, some people are saying, well, I'm not sure defunding the police really means this. And this is one of the arguments they're making right now, is that for the campaign, when Donald Trump or President Trump or candidate Trump, however you want to say it, is dealing with this, the latest Monmouth poll found that 77% of respondents believe most activists using the phrase defund the police, really that just means they want to change the way the police operate, and only 18% believe that defund the police means defund the police. So then you go to Seattle, and this one came out just the other day. The Seattle City Council, in a veto-proof majority in the Seattle City Council, Lathan, backed a proposal to defund the Seattle Police Department by 50%, to actually remove the 9/11 dispatchers from police control, and to then, whatever this means, imagine life beyond policing. So they sound like they're really serious about this stuff.
Well, they can imagine all they want. And
where's John Lennon right now?
Exactly. You can play John Lennon's song, which is, just a beautiful melody that describes Marxism.
Yes.
Okay? You don't have to imagine anymore, John. You can watch it happen in Seattle.
At Chaz
this
or Chop
exactly
or whatever. Yeah.
What Marxism is. So, it is not surprising to me that the polling says 3/4 of people don't think that when they say defund the police, they really mean defund the police, because as soon as they started saying it, there were a flurry of articles in all those same media outlets saying, well, that's not what they really mean. What they're talking about is maybe blah, 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 blah. So, yes, then they actually come out and do it. And so eventually, if people are paying attention, they will see that, yes, they actually do mean defund the police. In New York, they have said they're going to cut it. I forget the exact number that they're going to cut it. But he probably won't have to, because the request for retirement from New York PD just went up 400%.
That is true.
To the point where he's now said, okay, we can't let any more people retire from the NYPD.
Of course, they just cut $1 billion off of the budget, so who knows? Yeah.
Who possibly could have seen this coming?
Yes.
Everybody could have seen this coming. That's who saw this coming.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is that this is every mother concerned about this. And again, I got some data on the polling today, and some of the people that are the most committed on this issue and very upset are the black communities that the policing has been pulled in. So the black mothers are probably at the top of the list because these, look, if you're a wealthy white woman, you might be behind this movement and think it's all just wonderful because it's not coming to your neighborhood. But if the police are leaving somebody else's neighborhood, they really care about this. And a lot of these inner city neighborhoods, they need the police.
Yes. Well, we had that article the other day, 6 cities, 6 months, and 600 murders. We'll be right back.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that point of view is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347 5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME, pointofview.net/time, or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Just before we're done here, I'll give you kind of an update on where we are on the matching fund, and that is something we will be talking about. We have around the round table Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts, and Jacki Deason. And I thought, Kelly, let me come to you for just a minute, because one of our articles is the Republican Convention Outdoors. Jacksonville, Florida, really? But we've had just an interesting set of circumstances because even in our Texas hour, we were talking about the fact that you had the Texas Republican Convention, which was scheduled for Houston, and then the mayor canceled it. You have the National Republican Convention that was supposed to be in North Carolina, now it's in Florida. And I don't know if it's going to be indoors or outdoors. And so there's just a lot of really confusing things during this campaign season. And so trying to figure out how to put together a platform, what the president's going to run for. And can we talk about whether we have third-party candidacies? Kanye West? What is this all about? Give us some perspective here.
Well, normally what would happen now is we would have the conventions, both the Democrat and the Republican. The Democrat would come first because the incumbent goes later. But they would come out, they would develop a platform for their party, and then they would have all the speeches, and then the candidate would be officially nominated by the party, and this would all be something that people watched on TV. It's really become less about a normal. In the past, it was like, who's going to win?
Yes.
I mean, who's going to be the nominee, right? And so it kind of lost some of its theater there, but it still was very important. But the problem is, number one, the Democrats have basically said they're going to have a virtual convention. Now, that works perfectly in their strategy because they do not want Joe Biden in front of the public. And so this allows them to kind of keep him back because they know he's not really up to a lot of these things in public where you have to kind of be, seen, like for a long period of time,
Speaking
which you would do
in coherent sentences.
Yes. So, 120 million people, 126 million people have died of the coronavirus, and how many is it that died from gun? 150. 150 million have died from. So two-thirds
of the country
of our country is dead, and we don't even know it. Right?
Congratulations to us all for surviving the carnage that happens in Joe Biden's mind.
So clearly, that's not what they wanted, and so this actually works for them, I think. On the Republican side, though, is Trump knows that one of his greatest things was all these rallies and being out there with people. And so he's really doing everything he knows to do to try to make sure he can still have the convention, at least the portion where, is more the theater and more of the speaking and all that. And the difficulty is, you had a Democratic governor in North Carolina who was not going to make that work out. And so he moves to Florida thinking, okay, DeSantis is really good. He's been great. And then what do you know? It becomes a hot spot, right? And then, even Jacksonville, where you have a Republican mayor. Again, thought you were safe, but there's all kinds of controversy now because everything's such a hot spot and there's all this pressure. So nobody's sure what's going to happen. I mean, the platform at this moment has been frozen in place from 4 years ago. Yeah. I've been on that platform committee a number of times, and it's really important to get together and bring it up to date, especially when you have an incumbent president to say, here's what he said he would do and here's what he's done. So I don't know how they're going to work this out, and I don't think they do at this point. The idea of outside, it better be really quick because that's hot, and I don't know how that works with a lot of people. I just don't foresee this mix of some sort of MTV concert and Republican Party convention. I just don't. I don't think that's going to work. So I don't know what the solution is.
Lathan, you've worked on campaigns, and you're kind of our history major, and I just don't see anything like this that ever has happened before. Uncharted territory.
No, it certainly is. I think here's a possibility. How about Trump has a convention and just invites everybody to Mar-a-Lago, and the Democrats have theirs in Joe Biden's basement so he doesn't get lost. That's a feasible possibility at this point. Yeah, I mean it is. It is unprecedented because we haven't had these sorts of conventions in a time of pandemic like this. And I think Kelly is right that the Democrats benefit by not having Biden in nationwide media like he would be in a normal convention. But I think also they benefit by the fact that their convention attendees are not televised for 3 or 4 nights the way they are.
Booed over some things, didn't they?
Yeah, that's one of Kelly's right that the drama of the convention about you actually determining who the nominee has been gone for a long time. So what it has been educational for people if they're paying attention is the speeches that are made and the reaction to them and how a sort of a snapshot of where that party is, either party. And yeah, it wasn't long ago where the idea of including the word God in a plank of the platform got booed at the Democrat convention. And so I think they benefit by not having the foot soldiers of their party on display also. And look, I mean, both sides we all have, the crazy uncle, right? I mean, both sides have them. And when you put them on full display in front of everybody, there's a risk there. So it is sort of unprecedented, but they'll figure out something, and we'll still have an election, and people will still have a chance to go out and participate and pick the next leader of the free world.
Jacki, let me come to you because we have talked before, and even before you joined us here, we talked a little bit about the fact that usually you want to go to the extremes in the primary and then go to the center in the general election. And it is very obvious that day by day, Joe Biden gets more liberal. And if you look at the platform that he's put out, what's that, 120 pages, something like that, it does seem to me that he is taking on some of the issues you and I have talked about: Medicare for all, Green New Deal, guaranteed national wage, federal daycare, and just on. And the list just goes on and on and on of things that I would think some Americans, if they knew a little bit about this, would say, that doesn't represent my values.
Well, they know who's paying attention. They're doing their research, and basically it's just a grab bag for, a spending bonanza for all the constituencies they want to win. So they go to those people, to their leadership, and just say, what would you like? I really believe that's their approach because there's no limit for them. They don't really have any limits when it comes to spending money. For them, by the time the bill comes due, they'll all be dead. What do they care about spending your grandkids' money? So for them, I can imagine there's not a whole lot of give and take. I've never been to a Democrat convention or meeting of any kind, frankly, so I'm speculating, but you can just tell when you look at 120 pages, nearly all of it requires more money from us so they can give it away and stay in power. That's kind of the cookie cutter way they approach all issues.
Yeah, it's it's a shame that, because I think people don't do this, but it's very enlightening if people would just look at the platforms of the two parties, because you hear from the president and know what the president is going to do, but the president is one person, and the president fills all these other offices.
Yes.
And the philosophy that will be the actual what happens is more in line with what the platforms say. So, for instance, a lot of people thought, well, Donald Trump's not really that conservative. And they were, conservatives were worried about that.
I remember that. Yeah.
But he's actually probably one of the most conservative presidents ever because he put people in charge who were the conservative leaders in all those things. Whether it's Steve Moore, Larry Kudlow with the economy, whether, you name
Ben
it.
Franklin and Ben Carson,
We could just go, Ben Carson all the way across. So guess what? If Joe Biden is the president,
well,
Bernie Sanders and that crew, AOC, they're going to be the ones running all these agencies. And so the platform really does give you a view of where things will go. And you can look back 4 years, but it's kind of sad that I guess you see the new one that Biden just released. That tells you a lot. The Republicans, we'll see what they come up with, but it really is a difference on life. On marriage, on judges, on you just start going through energy, on the economy, on all these things, you would see. Again, if you didn't tell people which party was which, and you just laid these out, there's just such a huge difference that is so, I would think, would be so helpful for the American people.
Let's take a break. When we come back, that third issue was religious liberty. And I've got three individuals here that would like to address that, but also the issue of judges, because that was a big question mark. You and I remember that, saying, okay, is he going to put his sister in the federal courts? And is he going to be putting up people that have given to Planned Parenthood? And is he really very sympathetic to the LGBTQ issues and all of that? And we have 200 judges, am I right? 200. And we're hoping by 300 by the time this year is ended. And we know what those on the Supreme Court look like and some of those in the lower courts. Maybe we could get around the table here and get some comments about what that might look like, because that was a big issue 4 years ago. And I think it's become a big issue again. And it's kind of surprising to me because I would have thought, well, that's sort of done. But people are saying, what have you done for me lately? And they're still looking at the courts. Maybe because of some of those Supreme Court cases we just talked about. But let's take a break. We'll come back and get some thoughts on that right after this.
After some depressing rulings, it was great to get a win for religious liberty and school choice at the U.S. Supreme Court. The 5-4 decision means states that provide assistance to private schools may not exclude some solely because they are religious. In Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue, the court affirmed by a slim margin that the Constitution prohibits explicit religious discrimination. In 2015, the state of Montana established a program in which businesses could receive tax credits for their donations to an exchange that provided modest scholarships, no more than $150 each, to low-income private school students. The Montana Department of Revenue refused to allow the scholarship money to be used at religious schools. A group of mothers sued the Department of Revenue, claiming its action violated their First Amendment free exercise rights. A district court agreed with the mothers. The Montana Supreme Court did not. Rather than restrict the tax credit to secular schools, the Montana Supreme Court shut it down. About 70% of private schools in Montana are religious. The Department of Revenue based its position opposing scholarships to religious schools on the Montana Blaine Amendment that prohibits state funding of churches or religious schools. Blaine amendments are part of many state constitutions. The amendments are named after Senator James Blaine from Maine, who in 1875 tried to pass an amendment to the U.S. Constitution as a way to prevent Catholic schools from receiving any type of federal money. That effort did not succeed, but 38 states enacted Blaine amendments. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the Espinoza opinion. In it, he stated, a state need not subsidize private education. But once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools because they are religious. The decision is a huge victory for families. States may no longer prevent those participating in school choice programs from choosing religious schools, often the very best option. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. In studio with us today, Kelly Shackelford, Lathan Watts, and Jacki Deason. And let me just mention real quickly that, we've had that $100,000 match on the table, and you've heard us talk about that before because there was one that was extended till next Wednesday, which is July 15th, which is when your taxes are due. So get those in. But again, we're at $87,000, I think maybe even up to $88,000. So we just need about $12,000 left. And if you can help us out, click on that button at pointofview.net. Just a minute, I also want to send you to some of the websites, but let's go around the round table. Judges, I thought that was a big issue in 2016. It seems like even still a big issue in 2020.
I think it's maybe even a bigger issue. One is sort of perception and the other is sort of reality. The perception is that, obviously that Gorsuch was very disappointing in the social conservative areas.
Right.
And that, of course, Roberts has really kind of shocked everybody by just completely flipping on his own positions. He's sort of playing this political game to try to keep the court from looking like it's too conservative or whatever. And so a lot of people are kind of really dispirited, and they're kind of now demanding in Trump's base, that this was their issue. They're demanding no more people who do this kind of thing. In other words, you can really pick solid people if you're willing to fight for them, instead of this idea that, well, they're pretty good, but that's all we can get through, that kind of thing. I don't think that's acceptable anymore. But the reality is the ball is really being moved. I mean, Gorsuch is, the court is more conservative. Now, Roberts is doing some weird stuff, but the court is being moved. And you go beneath the 200, incredible, major difference. And guess where the future Supreme Court nominees are going to come from? They're going to come from these lower courts where, if you were Trump and you came in and you're trying to put conservatives on the Supreme Court and you look down, you're taking from usually like Court of Appeals and whatever. All you have to choose from is like Bush appointees. Now, Trump will have the ability to pick his own appointees for the future. And so guys like Jim Ho, who have just been out of the box, incredible, right? You've got, we go down a list of these people who have been really good. So I think you're going to see the game upped on judges, but the lower court has been really, really good, and they're at 200. I don't know how the president thinks he's going to get another 100 in this year, but I do think 50 might be possible, and that's still a huge, number. 160 is normal.
And one of the things, Lathan, I might just mention, when they go to First Liberty, it shows that some of the courts that have flipped. And explain that if you might, too.
Well, yeah. He's flipped a couple of those circuit courts of appeals, flipped from a majority of justices or judges that have been appointed by liberal presidents who have a liberal interpretation of the Constitution to conservative judges who have a textualist approach to the Constitution. And when you go to a circuit court of appeals, you don't sit in front of all of them. You get a random 3-judge panel. So having a majority of judges on that court gets you a better shot at getting a good panel when you're up in front of theirs. So he's flipped a couple of circuits already from more liberal to more conservative. He's within 2 picks in the Ninth Circuit, the traditionally most liberal circuit in America. If he got 2 more picks in the Ninth Circuit, he could flip the Ninth Circuit, which would be a monumental shift. He's already made it better by narrowing the margin the way he has, like I said, because you get a better shot at a good panel. But I think if he's reelected, I think you will see there are probably some liberal judges on the courts now who are holding on.
That's what I was going to ask.
Waiting to see who wins this election, right? If Biden wins, then I can retire and have a liberal pick my liberal successor. But if Trump wins, I think some of them are going to say, you know what, I hung on as long as I could, but I don't want to hang on another 4 years. And, you should have elected a liberal president. Sorry, I'm retiring or taking senior status in the federal judiciary. And, if Trump gets 2 of those on the Ninth Circuit, he flips the Ninth Circuit. And then let's not forget at the district court level, because the district court, even though it's sort of the trial court level for the federal courts, if you got good district court judges, they get it right the first time. You don't have to go to the appellate courts to try to fix it.
Well said.
So, and he's had some outstanding district court nominees, including Matthew J. Kaczmarek, former Deputy General Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Shout out to Judge Kaczmarek.
Jacki, let me come to you because you've been watching the courts for some time. And again, it may not be top of the mind for individuals, but it is still that religious liberty was that third issue in that polling. So I think a lot of people are seeing some decisions going with transgender and homosexual, and then they're seeing some religious liberty issues. So I think this is still going to be a campaign issue, don't you think?
I think it's huge because most people don't actually know the progress he's made. I don't know how much of the base can tell you that we've had 200 judges confirmed. So that's an entire branch of government transformed for a generation, maybe almost 2 generations, depending on our longevity. Apparently keeps going up and up and up. We should all send GNC memberships to all the federal judges who are good, keep them around for a while, preserve them. But I think people don't know how much has been accomplished already. It's a promise made and a promise kept. And you can't overstate the importance of it. In fact, I have a cousin who's very conservative who's about to peel off of Trump for whatever reason. And she said, I'm going to vote for him again just because of the judges.
Wow.
So I know that there are a lot of people who feel that way. It's the perfect excuse for people who don't want to have to get out and defend the more difficult quotes that he makes sometimes on Twitter or something like that. It's a very appropriate thing to say and a good reason to support him.
And, the Supreme Court, too. I mean, look, whoever gets the presidency is probably going to have a couple of Supreme Court. And so you're talking about either really solidifying the conservative makeup of the court, maybe for 30 years, or you're talking about it becoming liberal controlled.
Yes, either way.
So it's either a really long-term conservative court or an immediate really shock to the system where all the, there's all kinds of stuff from the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, religious freedom. I mean, you name it, that are 5-4 decisions that will all change if that flips the other way. So that it's a huge issue.
Jackie, we've got two grandfathers here, so we're saying that this could affect not just our children, but our grandchildren, and that's just pretty amazing. Just before we run out of time, we have JackiDaily.com. What will people find when they land on your website?
So JackiDaily.com is where you can find everything you want to know about the Jacki Daily Show. So you can go to my podcast and subscribe for free. And really, it's your choice. You can go to Blaze.com, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify. They're all there. And you can see my blog, which is really a series of op-eds and commentary on issues from mostly energy and environment issues, but also COVID-19, which is the biggest issue for the oil patch now, because the shutdown is really what hurt American industry with record bankruptcies. And then you can see my hunting photos. So if you want to see me shoot some pheasants and chucker, it's all there.
That's very good. Kelly, let's also talk about First Liberty, but also First Liberty Live, because you've been doing a great opportunity to hear from some really intelligent individuals that have come and joined you and provided some additional expertise. So if people sign up, what do they find and what's available for them?
Well, you can, there's, first I'd say go to the website. There's all kinds of things you can get, right? If you want stuff on even COVID-19, maybe your church, how to do it, we've got that laid out there. If you want to see that you do have a constitutional rights during the pandemic, look at our victories under COVID-19. There's a list of victories. We've won every case we filed. The Constitution is still fully in place. And you can even look at judges and all the other stuff you were going to go. Now, you asked me something, and I was trying to make sure.
No, just talking about your First Liberty Live, because we really have enjoyed watching that.
We've had one with Ted Cruz, with Dinesh D'Souza, with Al Mohler, I think the one we're going to have in the next week or two is Doug Collins. I don't even think we've announced that yet, but he's an amazing guy, attorney, congressman running for Senate, and a guy who was a chaplain in the Air Force.
And so, again, some great resources, but we are simply out of time before we're out of content. So I want to, again, thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes. Elisa, thank you as well. Enjoy this weekend, and we'll see you back here Monday right here on Point of View.
The year 2020 has been filled with problems, or let's just call them challenges. Before I get into that, we want to thank you. We just passed the end of our fiscal year, and many stepped up in a very big and sacrificial way, showing just how much they believe that Point of View is needed as we head into the last half of this year. And that's where our new challenge comes in. At the last minute, a friend stepped up with a surprising $50,000 matching challenge, and listeners matched it. But after that, yet another friend, knowing how important this year is, put down another $50,000 challenge, and because we were so close to deadline, said we could extend it just a bit to July 15th. As our nation deals with so many issues, make sure that Point of View can be a strong voice for truth by helping us complete that second match. Double your investment by giving at pointofview.net/time or call 1-800-347-5151. The clock is ticking. Pointofview.net/time. That's TIME. Pointofview.net/time or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.